all right? This is a little more stressful than the live build challenge that I went and saw, right? Like full lights on and stuff like that, but that's all right. At least it keeps me awake. Hopefully the next 30 minutes is going to keep you all awake as well. I'm sure you must be benefiting a lot from what you're hearing about Appian, right? There have been a lot of aha moments from Appian, people saying that this is a great feature, that's a great feature and stuff. But for me, one of the biggest aha moment is how they empower the partners, right? It's not about how big or how small the partners are, but what kind of value we as partners bring to the ecosystem, right? So just wanted to say a quick introduction. We wanted to give you an overview of the connected compliance solution. This is Vijay Pundi here. I'm the managing director for Yexle, based out of the UK. We are one of the build partners of Appian. I don't know if you saw yesterday, but we won the Delivery Excellence Award as well. So very proud, very pleased about that as well. And we've got Realta as well. Over to you, Siobhan.
Yes, hello, I'm Siobhan Slevin and I am with Realta Logic. Compliance and regulation is my thing, really. I think it's beautiful and amazing and wonderful, and it's great to be here today to show you our connected compliance solution. With Stephen?
Yes, and I'm Stephen McGowan, and I'm one of the other half of Realta Logic. Well, Siobhan is on the regulatory side, I'm on the technology side, and we'll explain why that matters as we're going through this presentation, because we bring both technology and regulation together and a way that we can get deployed and operationalized across businesses.
I'm just going to go back, and sorry about this, to the original slide that you saw when you arrived in. This is compliance. To me, this is quite beautiful. This is actually onboarding a new client for a retail bank in Australia. That's what it looks like pictorially. It shows its interdependencies. It just shows what it is to operationalize legislation and regulation in an organization. In Realta Logic, we're very much that compliance should not be a hygiene factor, that it actually should be part of your strategic decision-making processes. So I will continue through back to these. Sorry, hello again. Hello again, that's Vijay, that's Stephen. So starting with sort of the situation that people are familiar with, and I clicked far too many times.
Back one. Okay,
I'm not a clicker. Okay, yeah. Yay, good. Basically, with over 25 years in financial services industry myself, it's very, very clear that the situation is basically business stagnation when it comes to regulations and regulatory change. We just put together this pictorial of the 4 major banks in Australia, because that's where we're based currently, showing that risk and compliance is taking over 52% of their investment allocation. And if you take any of the other banks and institutions and insurance companies around the globe, it is of a similar picture. So as you can see here, that in increasing compliance headcounts, they're still failing to stop massive fines, and we do need a paradigm shift. More and more compliance positions are being required to be filled, while staff from other areas within the organisation are being rationalised. So it's just a stark reality of where we are today. We took the Citigroup, where they reduced their global headcount by 38%, but they actually increased their risk and compliance staff by 100% in that same time period. Citigroup, over that same time period, were fined $24 billion. To them, that was the cost of doing business, and that was, to them, acceptable, but to us, not so much.
Yeah.
So these are the challenges that we see in the world today. We are looking at compliance-driven business stagnation, just keeping the doors open, keeping us compliant, with little inability to innovate and to get new revenue streams and drive innovation. We have fragmented, reactive and manual and very high-cost solutions, point solutions, All of our compliance solutions, from KYC, onboarding, reporting, are all dealt differently and in different silos. There is an exponential growth in regulation, and talking here in the UK with the Brexit and the divergence between the EU and the new opportunity that brings to UK regulated firms, it's still a lot for entities and businesses to get their head around. There also is a lack of visibility, again back to siloed data and to siloed processes and procedures. And this obviously then slows time to market. When you're a regulated entity and you are maybe utilising passporting, EU freedom of services, freedom of establishment, or you're wrapping different offshore bonds or pulling together variable annuity products even, this is all slowed down by regulation and compliance, where it's slowing your ability to increase your revenue streams. So today with Vijay and Stephen, we're going to go through our solution, Connected Compliance. This is powered by Appian's low-code unified platform, and it provides a dynamic digital regulatory intelligent infrastructure. I love that phrase, digital intelligent regulatory infrastructure. Regulation needs to be living, breathing. It needs to be part of your operating model. It needs to fuel and underpin your workflows and your processes. It should not be a hygiene factor. It should not be something that you look at after you've had your product innovation ideas or after a piece of regulation comes into play. The two of them should be at initialization at T0 when you're looking at both your strategy and at your processes, procedures, and technology build. So this is where we are providing a living, breathing regulatory content as a service. We'll speak later on about obligations registers. I've managed many on Excel spreadsheets, and it's not nice. So I would love to see this living, breathing digital twin, effectively, of an obligations register that you could pick up any control, monitor, any process, procedure, and map it all the way back to your obligations register and your licensing requirements, but then also see where your obligations lie when a piece of regulatory change comes into account. So as you can see here, our regulatory intelligent architecture seamlessly manages regulatory change. And for us, it doesn't have to be an and or. You've got your corporate policies, you've got revenue, you've got targets. Net income has been squeezed more than it has been in quite a number of significant years. It does not have to be an and or situation. Compliance can be a competitive factor. In the grey is where innovation lives. Risk is not a dirty word as far as we're concerned, or a four-letter word. It is actually something to be embraced. It's not risk mitigation. It's sort of risk awareness and how you match that to your risk appetite statement and how you match that to your strategic views. I'll pass you over to Stephen now so we can get into the actual platform and how we deliver this.
So here we have some details on what exactly it is that, we've gone too far forward again.
It's the clicker.
Yeah, it definitely likes jumping.
Clicking,
all right. So
I to the side.
Yes. So talk a little bit what this is. So we've seen this sort of knowledge graph of that initial slide at the start, and we'll talk about it again in more detail, but that's what underpins a lot of what we do. Now, what that is it's packaged up different modules. The modules are basically every different piece of regulation, every different piece of legislation, and all the processes and controls and everything that go into that for particular purposes. So sometimes that's a new piece of regulation coming in. That'll be a module. Sometimes it's an entire process or procedure, like customer onboarding. We've packaged up and actually done as a particular module as well. And we're pretty agnostic. While we have put a lot of focus in financial services, this could also be energy. It could be we're working on red meat exports to California from Australia as one project at the moment, where we're dealing with both Australian regulation plus federal, US and California legislation.
And sorry, no kangaroo meat to California ever.
Never let bring kangaroo meat into California.
Yes.
That's just in case anybody's wondering. So what that allows us is it allows us to map out basically how all those things interlink, and it lets us see what the interconnections are and what the upstream and downstream dependencies are. Every single one of the key questions that you can answer out of those different paragraphs and pieces of legislation come out of that can be exposed as API endpoints, can be built into your workflows and underpin everything, which is very important because when things change, we can tell you what the impact of that change will be. Now, that starts off being something quite complicated. We change it into what is still complexity, but structured complexity. And then we simplify it by putting an API layer on top that allows us to basically expose dashboards and these different controls and way gates along the way in your process and procedures. This empowers our clients using things like Appian to be able to build their own intelligent applications on top of this. This gives us a solid foundation of single source of truth across basically everything we do. So if you have two different processes that are reliant on the same rules, at least you know you're working off the same rule and the same interpretation of the rule, that you don't end with divergence happening over time. And also this gives us the ability for that real-time feedback as we're moving through. So if we go into a little more detail on the graph now itself, so this, as Siobhan said, we think is very beautiful. This is every single thing you hit. If you were to walk into a bank in Australia today and say, hey, I'm a new client and I'd like to get a mortgage. This is 138 different paragraphs or sections across a number of different pieces of legislation. Five pieces of legislation. And that's, this exposes 987, what we call them regulatory touch points, but they're like the key questions, the way gates, the controls that come out of these pieces of legislation. You can interact and basically put all of these in and integrate them into your workflows along the way. Some of these are related very much to operationally, how do we make sure we can actually onboard somebody compliantly. Some are more related to the reporting that you might need to do around that. But the important thing is that all of these are mapped, and when something changes, we can map back exactly how that changes impacts. We look out here at the periphery, we have some of the, a little hard to see on the video like this, but there are some white nodes. Those white nodes are the questions you need to answer to be able to, for the graph to be able to tell you the decision based on those particular questions you can ask. Those are mapped within Appian back to, and we'll show it in a little more detail as part of something we're going to show here, back to the individual places where it's like this consent which is required for this particular point, this map back to that particular record field that it's stored on, that particular form. So we can say that if something changes around consent, then this process needs to be potentially changed. Instead of you having to rip it apart and try to understand what a team of BAs, where is the regulatory rules, what are the things we had to do versus the things we've chosen to do as a business, we can expose that very, very quickly. That's very important because we keep that separation of concerns, and that's a phrase I hear us say a few times, where we keep the regulatory logic.
Don't find Stephen $1 every time he says that in the office.
Yes. So all the regulatory logic is kept separate to the business logic, which is very important when we want to try and maintain things over time, that we understand the why. Now, we heard earlier from one of the NatWest talks earlier talking about the computer saying no. While we have a regulatory rules engine here, it's not black and white, and regulation isn't black and white. We have a non-Boolean logic. I'm going a little technical for a second. So it's not true or false that things exist in here. We have a concept of it's called the deontic logic, which is the logic of ethics. So it's something can be obligatory or it can be forbidden, which is kind of black and white. But it could also be permitted. So permitted means we need to make a business decision. We can do it, but now we need to make a business decision about should we do it. What's important with that is we need to expose what is the grey very, very quickly, because that's where we should concentrate our smart people on. Smart people doing smart work, as opposed to them spending time trying to work out what is black and white, because we can expose that very quickly with a system like this. Now, I'll hand back over to the others so that they can talk through some of the solution.
Sure. Yeah. All that diagram was not meant to scare you, but actually make you think that it's good, right? So every time you find $1, I think you find me $1 for every time as well, right? When I said it's more configurable.
I need new
not
shoes.
Codable.
It's going to
and
be...
pink ones too, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So what we have done is very, very interesting, right? So we have completely ensured that all the decisions, everything is basically configurable, codable, driven by business logic. But whenever a user is having a look at it, not only can they look at a complete statistic of creating the onboarding, but every onboarding that's happening here is actually underpinned by the logic that's sitting on Realta and the logic and the business and the workflow configurations that we've done on Appian, right? So I'll just go through a few things from an onboarding perspective. I think Appian as a screens may be familiar to you all. So you could create an onboarding. When the user creates an onboarding, they're able to see the previous onboardings that they've done. They're also able to see a few statistics of what's available there, right? And the progress. So the progress is basically to see if they are lagging or leading from a compliance perspective, if they have to speed up anything. right? Once they create the onboarding, we can actually give various branches around this, or the solution is built in such a way that it's configurable, right? This is where we were saying, is it a customer? Are you coming in as a retail customer, a single customer, joint customer, so on and so forth? Depending on that, it can also tell you what kind of categories. Have you come in for an advice? Have you come in for a product or a solution, so on and so forth? Everything is basically configurable. All these questions are driven and underpinned by Realta, with us, providing contextual data for the user. Right? You can actually gather all the details of the onboarding. Again, a few screens just to show what you can do. And again, this also, the data in it, the collection of information is also underpinned by the data that you're getting from Realta. You can have a summary. This is basically also to ensure that, again, you see a few things there, like a green tick marks and stuff. Those are consents as well that are driven by the questions that you were saying, whether it's permitted or not permitted, so on and so forth. Right?
Yeah, because for some of it we're assessing, sometimes it's applicability. Do we have to do this task? For this type of client, is there enhanced due diligence required? And that's based on particular regulatory controls and particular way gates.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it's about, now, have we actually done this process correctly? Have we gathered the correct information? Are we permitted to send this information to a third party? What information are we permitted to send?
Correct.
That is all tied back into these regulatory controls and way gates that come from our sort of regulatory rules engine.
There's very much that with rules and regulations and compliance. When you're looking at onboarding, or you're looking at loan origination, or you're looking at your operational resilience, you're looking to see that connectedness between your people, processes, and technology. And we've heard a lot over the last couple of days about data fabric, but we've also spoken about process fabric. You need to be able to converge the two together to ensure that you've got that complete picture. There is no point in having a process that is efficient and looks really cool if you are not compliant. You need that live attestation. I'm quite familiar with what do we have to do to get across the line, and it's no longer 51% compliance, it's that 50.01 on a ventilator, and at midnight on the 5th we are compliant. And it's very much of the ability to not spend CapEx but not look at your OpEx. And then when a new piece of regulation comes along, you've got that thing that Stephen spoke about unpicking and starting again. Where if you've got this digital regulatory infrastructure that we've built out with Yexle, and their team have been amazing, because how we were trying to approach it and get it infused into the Appian build. We had many late nights and so forth, because we're based in Sydney, and Vijay and his team are in the UK and in India. And we actually only met face to face 3 weeks ago at Appian APJ, which was quite cool. And I think we're very much the epitome of what the connected community for Appian is, and building this and designing this application brought together our smarts and the abilities of Yexle, and to push that thought process out of the box, that compliance is not a hygiene factor, that compliance can be infused at initialization and at build, and that I was going to say the irritating thing, but it's the irritative nature of compliance. It goes hand in hand amazingly well with Appian, because of the configurability.
Correct.
And it's not coding, it's the configurability. And rules and regulations, you will need some processes to go in tandem with each other that are off different bases. If you've got a multi-jurisdictional operation and you've got different requirements for different types of different reporting, you need to have that visibility, and you need to be able to look at it with a strategic lens. And what we can show here.
And this is a configurable workflow as well, right? It's totally configured based on the questions, the answers that have been driven. So you're able to actually get the SLAs define this, which is actually the out-of-the-box features of Appian. So we've leveraged that one as well. And of course, we leverage everything from the Appian's perspective to look at the workflow. You can slice and dice the data any which way you want. One of the most important thing that we wanted to show is, when you take a view of the onboarding of a customer, not only are you able to see the status, the progress of where the onboarding is, from a status or a stage perspective, but you're also able to see a lot of information about the actions. And these are the actions that have been underpinned by Realta, And these are the ones that have been raised with the customer, they've been clarified, and the system is basically going to say whether the action is permitted or not in order to move to the next step.
What we're showing here is actually something called a TMD, but it would be the equivalent of a KID here. And I'm only in Australia a couple of years, so in my previous life, I actually helped design the KID. I represented Ireland and Insurance Ireland at the European level, so I got to work on the PRIPS legislation. So when we were trying to come together with the methodology, especially for the illustrations and showing that value and that customer centricity, it's very, very important that during that process that you have in this area, the PRIPS, the KID, that is applicable and that it's up to date and that it is what it says on the tin. If you have it built into the process like this, when you're onboarding the client, the actual KID that they are given at that time and that version control is there, and that is quite important, especially when you go down the line and trying to get that single client view. We built that in the equivalent in Australia now. Which lucky for me, they basically just cut and paste Articles 9 and 10 of MiFID II and have brought that into the Australian legislation over the last 12 months. And having that true customer centricity and also operational resilience, which is quite key in a lot of regulators' minds at the moment. Having this ability to configure the rules and regulations with your processes is becoming far more important and intrinsic to your meeting your strategic goals and your revenue goals as well. It's
no longer acceptable to just have a policy that says you intend to do something right. You have to actually be able to show it in real time, which is very much what this is about, showing, tying it back to regulatory controls or your obligations, saying that this is actually what we're doing to achieve the goals we set out to get.
And that's the reason why we've leveraged the power of Appian to be able to make this driven not just by Realta and the processes, but also by different personas, the different views that we can offer, right, from a compliance user, an onboarding user and stuff. So, especially leveraging everything from a drill down perspective. Data fabric was something that you talked about, right? So we could get data also from Realta, from Appian, or any other systems, right, in order to basically surface the data, in one single area. Yeah. Not only from an overall perspective, but we can also look at it from an individual perspective to say, for a given individual, what are the compliance, what is the total number of compliance that's applicable, that's permitted, non-permitted, compliant as well. Through this, we are also able to drive if there are any expiry or if there is any impact determination of any change to the regulation, like you said. We're able to accurately zero in and understand what the impact is, not just at the business level, but at a customer level, and take remedial or necessary actions around it.
When you're taking issue, when you're looking at data fabric and you're looking at process fabric and things being connected, if you don't have connected compliance, you're actually sort of having a false start. Because regulated entities, even though compliance is viewed as where fun goes to die, or they are the where innovation is not allowed, it's not. It has to be integral to your technical design implementation. It has to be part of your product governance arrangements and your product design. If you have that ability to see your rules and regulations in context, context is king. That allows you to make your decisions based off real-time information. Hindsight reviews, when a breach or an incident has already occurred, needs to be something of the past. You need to be able to know that if you log on to our system as a compliance officer or a chief risk officer or an internal audit, that you've got a live view of exactly what's going on, but you can actually then, as Stephen said, drill down to the monitors and controls, or drill up to actually what process, procedure, what policy that comes from, and then also back to a living, breathing obligations register, so you know exactly why you're doing that step. So from a regulator's perspective, you've got that live attestation and you've got that ability to stand behind, this is what we're doing and why.
And that's what we're surfacing here as well, right? So anything that's regulatory, like what Siobhan says, we try to make it fun, so make it more configurable rather than codable. right?
Yeah.
Shoes again for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so this is how we do it, right? We are able to, the 900 plus touch points that we have, we are able to...
987.
987.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a mathsy.
Yeah, so we are able to do configuration exactly in order to ensure that the actual ones are being used as part of onboarding very, very seamlessly. So it completely underpins what is to be done.
Yeah, and because part of our service is the maintenance and sort of keeping up to date with the regulation. So as things change, because we know exactly where they're tied into in our Appian workflows, we're able to say, okay, this is what needs to be changed, this is what needs to be reviewed, as opposed to that whole thing we talk about, like, hiring a team of BAs, which have to be about regulatory and technology, to try and work out what it is we chose to do in the past versus what we had to do.
Yeah.
Now we can actually just flag that and say, here is where the difference is.
Correct. Not just from the touch points perspective, but also from an entity perspective, we are able to configure that. So it's a combination of doing it across entities, across touch points and everything like that. So I think we've got a few more minutes, but over to you, Siobhan.
This slide, the lads wanted me to take it out, but I liked it, so we broke it up because of what are the benefits. For me, the main ones are operational resilience and agility. Being in financial services for over 25 years, my job has always been to make sure my in-force book was compliant, and then any new pieces of legislation or regulation, how am I going to generate new revenue, or are there new income streams that I can take for that? So that ability to have that resilience and agility was very, very key for me. Enhanced process mining, separation of concerns, I will give you both $1 back. I like that because your business logic and your regulatory logic are two different things. You make business decisions. The regulators may say you are permitted to do it, but you make that decision. You need to be able to differentiate because that allows you to make decisions for that particular market or that particular product in isolation and allows you to stand behind it. And my other one was proactive management of regulatory change. Regulatory change should not be feared. It is the cost of doing business in a regulated entity. It shouldn't be reactive, not even proactive anymore. You need to be anticipatory, and having that ability and that agility is key for me.
And I suppose the things that I really care about from this, I'm a software developer. My background in software has always been software development. So version control, compliance doesn't really sit under that in the current scheme of things, but it should. Everything should be deployable. So what we work through here is essentially DevOps for compliance. It's deployable compliance. It's bringing compliance out of the silo that it's in, stopping it being a waygate that slows down our sort of end-to-end continuous processes, and actually ensures we can get things deployed quickly and compliantly. Which then also brings into this whole concept of business change and regulatory change and managing that without disruption. Like if something changes and we can actually already run test case against that to tell us that there is no impact, or that the impact is minimal and tells us where to focus, that's huge. That saves those massive amounts of time, but also that's real value to the business. Allows us to gives us a real competitive edge.
Yeah, and from an Appian perspective, it's always bringing data, process, and people together, right? So bring the data and people together through all the integrations, right? Workflow, monitoring, make it very seamless, right? And from the perspective of process, make sure that it's a single source of truth so that everyone can see, based on roles and rights, of course, but make it available in one place, especially leveraging anything around the data fabric. And the most important thing is, it's the speed to market as well, because we've made it
Not the
more...
fun, then.
It is fun, right? It's speed to market, right? So they don't have to sit and scratch their heads, if you know what I mean, right? So it's more configurable rather than codable. So you give the administrators the opportunity to do that, and that's all it is. The system is very scalable. It's actually future-proof as well, right?
So I think thank you very much for listening to us today, and hopefully you will fall in love with compliance and regulation more than you did before you came in here, and embrace it, don't fear it.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
If you want to talk to us, we'll be around next week.